Freddy vs. Jason, the Novelization by Stephan. Chapter 12. Springwood was dead. The storefronts were abandoned. The streets were empty. The sidewalks silent. A police car slowly rolled by downtown. Sheriff Williams' curfew was in full effect. But this wasn't the first time that Springwood had been a ghost town. No, and it sure as hell wouldn't be the last. Lori and Will had spent the night hiding in Mark's, Bobby's van. Will had been inconsolable. Mark had been his one true friend for so very long. He had helped Will to keep it together through all of their time at Weston. It was Mark who'd got them out of that place, Mark who knew everything about him, his best friend. Another name to go on the list. They were dying, all of them, falling like ninepins, one by one by one. As soon as the sun was up, Lori had used her cell phone to call Kia. Every death had taught them something. Each murder had given them another clue, another confirmation. They had seen Mark go up in smoke in front of their very eyes. They had seen 4 horrible gashes appear in Mark's face, as if someone invisible had taken hold of him and cut him up bad. Then they had seen the writing on Mark's back, Freddy's back. It was Freddy Krueger, real Freddy fucking Krueger. So it was time to do something about it. Either fight back or wait to be killed. They'd done enough crying, enough running. The police, Lori's dad, they were all no good. None of their parents factored into anything. Will and Lori were on their own. But not entirely alone. There was Kia. And what about some of the others at the rave? They might not buy into the whole Krueger deal, but they'd have to be blind not to see that something was really wrong. And that thing in the hockey mask? They all saw what happened there. He was no ordinary man. Sure, he wasn't Krueger, but he wasn't Soapy Joe either. After Lori had made her initial call, it was Kia who had done the rest. She got busy on the phone, found out who she could talk to, who wasn't interested, who wanted to do something about it. And what it all boiled down to was this: a meeting in the damp, stinking basement pad at Freeburg's parents'. At the meeting, Freeburg was rolling a joint, his 27th since the rave. He hadn't slept all night and was still tweaking after having witnessed the Jason Voorhees experience. He sat at a beat-up round table, they all did, except for an endlessly yawning Lori, who lay on a moth-eaten couch. There was another little table in the corner of the room, taken up by an ancient 433 megahertz piece of shit PC. The place stank of weed and God knows what other shit Freeburg hid down here. Lori took a look around her. This was it? The Great War Council? Freeburg stoned? Will, poor Will, depressed, morose? Kia, angry, irritable? Linderman, totally freaked? Okay, so come on. If I had to bet my whole life savings on the outcome of this fight, who would I pick? The Freddy Krueger Jason Voorhees tag team? Or the Freeburg Five? It was Linderman who spoke first. Why don't we all just leave town? Made sense, but Will shook his head. Even if we leave, Freddy can still get to us. We all know about him. We're all afraid of him. It was our fear that gave him his power. We're marked now. Screw the clown, whined Freeburg, sucking on his weed. What kind of pussy comes after you in your dreams anyway? Now that dude back at the cornfield? That's who we should be afraid of. Tell me who the fuck that was. Freeburg had a point. Only 2 people in the room had had some kind of trip involving this Krueger guy, so they could have imagined the whole thing. But all of them had seen the guy in the hockey mask. It must have been that fucked up dude who'd killed Blake and Trey. But who the fuck was he? His name is Jason Voorhees. Who said that? The voice came out of the darkness of the basement staircase. Frightened, the kids all looked around to see Deputy Stubbs step forward and down into the light. Without a second's thought, Freeburg flipped the joint into his mouth and swallowed it. Years of practice, my friend, years of practice. After a few moments, joint gone, Freeburg spoke up, sounding just a little too defensive. Shit, man, how'd you know we were here? Stubbs glanced across at Will. No offense, But that mystery van out in the back wasn't exactly subtle. Will groaned. The van was way too easy to spot. What a dork. Great, added Kia. The cops. Great, so now we're completely fucked. Way it looked to her, they'd been busted wide open by the man. It was all over. Stubbs raised his hands palm open. No, I'm here to help, he explained. He could tell they weren't convinced. An uneasy silence descended as Stubbs came right up to the table. He took them all in, each of them. They were tired, afraid. Just kids. They shouldn't have to. Stubbs had already made his decision when he left Sheriff Williams' office. There's no going back now. This Jason Voorhees, he announced, looking at each of the kids in turn, was supposedly drowned at Camp Crystal Lake in 1957 whenever he was 11. The counselors weren't watching him. Then they made the mistake of killing his mother. Legend has it, Jason kept coming back from the grave to punish whoever returned to the camp. So I'd say we're dealing with a copycat here. Linderman went along with everything except that last sentence. He's not a copycat, he said, still shaking from the memory of that moment of certain death. I've seen what he can do, up real close. He's the real Jason. That's not possible, Stubbs replied. Jason is dead. Freeburg was not impressed. Well, then you better start thinking outside the box, dude, 'cause somebody's definitely bending the fucking reality rules. But Stubbs was certain. Back at the precinct, he'd taken the time to do some serious research. The official records were quite clear. Some years ago, FBI agent Elizabeth Marcus had lured Voorhees into an ambush. Voorhees resisted arrest, so a heavily armed SWAT team took him out. According to Marcus's own report, the Voorhees termination had been comprehensive and in clear view of over 30 trained law enforcement officers. The alleged copycat murders had started almost immediately afterwards, commencing with the killing of the coroner who carried out the official autopsy on Jason's remains. The copycat psycho then went on a killing spree from the federal morgue at Youngstown, Ohio, all the way back up to Crystal Lake, Jason's traditional stalking ground. There, the maniac attacked and killed some of Jason's last surviving relatives. The copycat was never caught, but it was rumored that he was killed in self-defense by two of his would-be victims. Stubbs was surprised that local police had not taken any efforts to confirm this because, like the perpetrator here now at Springwood, the copycat killer had been extremely violent and difficult to apprehend. He had killed at least 4 police officers at Crystal Lake, so you would have expected them to have made sure the killer was dead. If they had, this probably wouldn't be happening right now. Stubbs was in no doubt that the Crystal Lake copycat and the Springwood copycat were one and the same guy, someone who fit the classic profile of an aggrieved relative of one of the victims of the real Jason Voorhees. This had happened once before. After all, a paramedic named Roy Burns had gone berserk and copied Jason's M.O. back sometime in the mid-1980s. The group had reached an impasse. Was it Krueger or Voorhees? Lori was depressed. The whole thing was going nowhere. Wait a minute, Will started slowly. He was thinking it all through. What if Freddy... Freeburg groaned as soon as he heard the F word. Will ignored him. This was beginning to make some kind of sense. What if Freddy, he continued, brought Jason back? Maybe he was too weak to go after us on his own, so he used Jason. He knew that we'd think it was him. That we would spread the fear again. And now that it's working, it's like he can't shut Jason back down. Lori yawned and rubbed her eyes. She caught herself dozing. She had to stay awake. She had seen with her own eyes what could happen if she fell asleep. Like Mark. Anyway, maybe Will had something. She forced herself to join in. She had an idea as well. Freddy died by fire, she stated. Jason by water. How can we use that? I say we focus on Jason first, piped Linderman. Lori's contribution seemed to have inspired him to make the effort. But, Lori countered, I thought we decided that Freddy's the one pulling the strings. Shouldn't we get him first? Maybe you should try offering Freddy a sacrifice, suggested Stubbs. Despite the grimness of the situation, Freeburg cracked a grin. Totally, like a virgin, someone pure. Well, don't look at me, warned Linderman before they even thought of starting on him. "Even if you pay for it, it still counts." The implication of Linderman's defense somehow slipped everyone by. Even Kia, who usually never missed an opportunity to belittle Linderman, let this one pass. She turned with a sly smile to look across at Laurie and said, "We all know who the virgin is here." "Kia, what?" Laurie was stunned. "Oh, come on," bitched Kia. "I know you never made it with Will. Why would he want to?" she said, and seductively draped an arm over Will's shoulders. "When he can fuck someone like me." Kia leaned forward and licked Will's ear sexily. Laurie expected him to push Kia away, but he loved it. Will just sat there and smiled as Kia licked his face. She was hot, and she was right. Will stood up and looked down at Laurie. Laurie with her simpering, soulful, goody-two-shoes little face. "All right, tie the bitch up," Will snarled. Laurie yelped. She fell back off the couch and half ran, half crawled for the door, as the rest of the gang leapt after her. Linderman had a roll of duct tape. Kia had some rope. Laurie didn't know where they kept this stuff, and she didn't care. Someone grabbed her arm, someone behind her. Dr. Campbell, Dad. "Don't worry, Angel, you've still got me." But his face was speckled with blood. "Dad, you're smiling, but there's blood on your face and on your hands," she thought. Campbell pulled his daughter close. "Come on, honey, give Daddy a kiss." "Gross!" Campbell slipped his daughter a length of deep wet tongue right into her mouth, tonguing her lips, her cheek, everywhere. And his right hand was clamped firmly over her crotch, his fingers probing, rotating. Laurie struggled to break free. She was able to whip her head away, disengaging herself from Daddy's incestuous saliva. But he held her fast. She was wrapped too tightly in the arms of Freddy Krueger. Laurie screamed. She tried to push him away, tried to claw at his burned, rotten face. No use. "Your lips say no," Freddy spat contemptuously. "But Freddy says yes!" Laurie awoke with a scream, making everyone in the basement start. They all spun and looked over at where she'd nodded off on the couch. "Are you all right?" asked Will. "You fell asleep." He'd said that last phrase almost as an accusation, but Laurie didn't reply. Her heart was hammering with abject fear. The dream had been so real. She'd managed to grab Freddy. She'd ripped at his face, managed to tear... Barely believing what she knew she was about to see, Laurie opened her closed fist to reveal the object it held. It contained one of Freddy's bloody ears, pulled off in the fight. "Jesus!" screamed Laurie, and she let the ear fall to the basement floor, where it immediately dissolved into a pile of cancerous maggots. Laurie jumped aside, making way for Stubbs, who ran forward and stomped on the maggots with his regulation-issue boots. The dirty little bastard squelched under his feet. Kia could have chucked there and then. "I pulled it out of my dream," said Laurie, amazed and more than a little bit frightened. "How's that possible?" asked Stubbs, grinding the last of the maggots into gloop. It was Freeburg who replied. "Anything's possible now, don't you get it?" "Two killers," shuddered Kia. "We're not safe awake or asleep." "It's not the sleep that's killing us," Laurie insisted. "It's our dreams." Something Laurie just said, it clicked with Will, reminded him of a comment Mark had made a couple of days ago. Then he remembered. "At Weston," he said, thinking it all out, "Mark and I never dreamed." "Were you on any drugs?" asked Laurie. "Yeah, something called, what was it? Hypnosil. They never told us what it was for, but everyone there was taking it." Will looked at Laurie, and she in turn looked at Linderman, who knew immediately what to do. Linderman went across the basement floor and booted up Freeburg's ancient PC. There were yellowing crusted stains on the keyboard. The startup and app load time took forever, and Freeburg's ancient modem was so slow it could have been steam-powered. But eventually Linderman was online. Finally, Linderman was in his element. The rest of the guys were grateful for the break. At least they could pause between revelations. Kia was still seriously freaked out that Lori had actually been attacked here, right in front of them. It was just like Will had said. They weren't safe anywhere, not anywhere they could dream. That ear, it had been the proof. "Give me a second," said Linderman over his shoulder. "Just give me a second." "Got it. Hypnosil, experimental drug, not even approved by the FDA yet, used for the suppression of sleep disturbance, specifically the dream state section of the sleep cycle." Another piece of the puzzle had just fallen into place. All the kids at Weston were being doped with Hypnosil to prevent them from dreaming. That was the only way the people of Springwood had been able to close the door on Freddy for these last 4 years. "We need some of those pills," said Lori. "Enough for all of us." Then she looked at Will. "Can you get us back into Weston Hills?" Will reached into his back pockets and pulled out the swipe card and keys that Mark had stolen from Kinsey. He smiled grimly. Meanwhile, over in the corner of the room, Linderman pulled up his favorite search engine, then typed in the name Jason Voorhees. Chapter 13. Of all the places Will expected to have been heading for this early evening, Weston Hills was not it. He rolled the van to a halt near Stubbs's patrol car at the rear of the massive psychiatric institution. Will stopped for a moment and looked up at the tall brick tower near the old abandoned west wing. Something about that tower gave him the creeps. He never understood why they had left that wing empty. Stubbs nudged the teenager, breaking his reverie. Will led the way to the same back door he and Mark had escaped through just 2 days earlier. One card swipe later, and the secured door was open. They entered quietly, one after the other. Will, Stubbs, Lori, Kia, Linderman, Freeburg, and behind them, the shadow, the massive, hulking shadow. Security had been heightened since Will's escape. The staff at Weston could have reprogrammed the system to deactivate Kinsey's card entirely, but Dr. Campbell's orders had been explicit. He wanted the system set up so that the card would still work, but that anyone using it would also trigger some kind of hidden alarm. That way, if Will Rollins tried to get back inside the building, they would know, and they would be able to go and restrain him. And now, someone with the stolen card had just gained access to the building. The light flashed on the security console, door number 6. In the dimness of the security room, the guard saw the winking light immediately. Easy decision. He got up out of his seat, straightened his uniform, checked that his gun was holstered, then went to investigate. He didn't want any trouble, but if any of the crazy little bastards put up a struggle, he'd blow their ass straight to hell. Stubbs, too, had his hand by his holster. Will was leading them slowly up the darkened staircase. At the top, they came to a T-junction in the corridor. They'd headed left, and they'd only been in the place a couple of minutes, and already Will was the only one who didn't feel lost. "This place is really huge," whispered Lori. "We'll never find the Hypnosil." "Two groups, then," said Stubbs. "You guys," he nodded to Freeburg and Linderman, "come with me. We meet back here in 20 minutes. The rest of you, stay together." Then Stubbs set off with his team close behind, leaving Will, Kia, and Lori to head in the other direction. Despite himself, Stubbs was letting the place get to him. Sure, it had been refurbished and looked modern on the inside, but the outside was eerie as shit, and just the sheer size of the interior coupled with the omnipresent low lighting. There was something about the very idea of insanity that scared the hell out of the policeman. He pushed open a door on the right-hand side of the corridor. Nothing but some kind of monitoring equipment. He closed the door and rejoined the others. Freeburg was rolling up yet another joint, like he really had a mind of his own. He lit up, then offered a hit to Linderman. Linderman was having none of it. He waved Freeburg away, casting a fearful glance in the direction of Stubbs. Freeburg rolled his eyes. What's he gonna do, arrest me? Which kinda struck Linderman as missing the point. The guard placed a hand on his gun. The holster was already open. It was very dark. The door was shaking. The guard stepped forward. Was somebody hitting the door? Did he imagine seeing the door shake? It's impossible. We're talking 120 pounds of reinforced steel on that door. The guard took another step. Should he open the door? Okay, just slow down. Move forward. Quietly, okay? Get your gun ready. Step forward. Wait. Listen. The guard put his ear to the door, and BAM! 120 pounds of reinforced steel broke off its equally solid hinges and flew forward inside the doorway, crushing the guard instantly. The guard lay there dead beneath the door, his eyes open and blood trickling from his ears and mouth. A black heavy boot stepped forward onto the flattened door, crushing the air out of the guard's lungs. "What was that?" jumped Linderman. The sudden sound of the crashing door had echoed right along the corridor, causing Linderman and Stubbs to nearly have a twin cardiac arrest. Stubbs looked back down the corridor. "Where's Freeburg?" he asked. Freeburg was nowhere to be seen. Linderman cursed under his breath. Trust a fucking dopehead to screw everything up. 10 minutes and Freeburg probably couldn't remember why he was even there. Meanwhile, Lori hadn't heard the broken security door. She, Will, and Kia were too engrossed by their current surroundings. Will said he'd always thought this was a patient's room, but right now it looked kinda like a morgue. Both walls of the long chamber were lined with beds and slabs, and on each slab lay a body. Lori looked closer and shuddered. The bodies had patches over their eyes, thick black covers. She reached forward to touch a man's face. She hesitated, held back. Fingers were inches away, shaking. Are they dead?" she asked. The dead man sucked in a deep, long, and unexpected breath, causing Lori to jump back, startled, before the man lay quiet again and still. It was only now that Lori noticed that a number of the tubes and wires were attached to each of the bodies. The connections ran to various monitors. She also saw that each patient had been given an intravenous drip, along with a number of other injected bag solutions. All the bodies were hooked up like this. Will stepped over to her and picked up a chart clipped to the foot of the man's bed. Quickly he flipped through the pages. Most of the medical jargon and abbreviations made no sense at all, and a lot of the handwriting was illegible, but Will was able to read enough to reach a shattering conclusion. "They're in a coma. It says... Shit! It says they were given too much Hypnosil." Lori couldn't believe it. "Who would do this to people?" Will handed her the chart, then quickly took a look at some of the other patients' charts. They were all the same. "Lori, your dad's signature is at the bottom of all of these charts." Another piece of the puzzle, another blow, yet another terrible secret. Lori shivered with overpowering emotion, then ran for the door. She didn't want to stay in this room a second longer. What was happening here? It was horrible. These people were all victims, drugged-up zombies. Her father, Kia, and Will went after her. If either Kia, Will, or Lori had looked through the large rectangular window in the north wall of the patient room, they would have seen through into the adjacent monitoring room where Freeburg was rolling up his latest joint. He had been awake since the morning of the rave. He had taken hell knows how many drugs, and he had been necking joints since the attack of the monster goalie. He was now completely and totally out of his fucking tree. Shit in place, Freeburg licked the paper, sealed it, lit the mother, then had a long, cool toke. Oh yeah. Like he needed all this bullshit. Life's too short to waste on hockey, man. He sat down on the dusty floor and relaxed. He wasn't asleep. No way, Jose. He wasn't that stupid. If that Lori kid was right, sleep was totally non grata. He just wanted to rest his eyes, that's all. Just wanted to. His pupils were like pinholes, and they stayed that way even when he turned his head left and saw the hideous foot-long red and green caterpillar squirming its way across the open doorway. It was one ugly little bastard, squat, leathery, with something like black spikes for crawlers, and its face, sweet holy mother. It was like a demon thing, with those cruel, slanting eyes and long fangs that sprouted upwards from its bottom jaw. Freeburg frowned. Come on, discrimination is not cool. Hey, little buddy, he ventured. Then he stumbled forward and started to crawl on all fours toward the caterpillar. The creature seemed to smile as it reared up to meet the stoner. Freeburg was so out of it, he didn't notice that the caterpillar seemed to grow as it moved, but he did see the bulbous hookah, which suddenly appeared out of thin air beside the caterpillar. A broad smile chilled its way across Freeburg's face. The hookah was bubbling, and he could smell the herb from there. The caterpillar smiled again, then writhed its way into position to take a deep puff from the hookah. Then it blew its mouth full of delirious fumes into Freeburg's gawking face. Freeburg breathed in deep, and the verdict? Coolio. Freeburg's head was spinning. He wanted to go for himself, but when he went to crawl forward, up to the hookah, the glass tube vanished. All the same, the little taster Freeburg just had was the ultimate high. Maybe it needed to blend with the caterpillar's own juices before it was just right, you know, like those worms they stick in tequila. Maybe this fat worm was totally happening. Freeburg wanted to show his appreciation to his new friend, but the caterpillar was inching away in the direction of the closed connecting door to the patient room. Whoa, check it out! As the caterpillar crawled nearer to the patient's room door, the door shrank. No, really. Check it out. Until soon the door was so small that the caterpillar had to squeeze to pass through it. Awesome. Like it was some kind of Alice in Freddy Land vibe or some weird shit. Hey, come back, little friend. Give me more of that puff. Earth was not calling Freeburg. He dragged himself drunkenly forward in the direction of the shrunken door. It never once occurred to him that he had no chance of squeezing his big fat ass through a 2-foot-high door frame. Freeburg pushed open the door and crawled into the patient room. The caterpillar was gone, so he stood up. Something didn't make sense. Hadn't he just... whatever. And now it was his turn to be freaked out by the bodies arranged on the 2 rows of slabs running down the length of the room. He didn't know they were only comatose. He thought they were all dead. Either way, they shouldn't all just, sit up at once like that, should they? Oh! Wired to a plethora of cables and tubes, the bodies sat bolt upright, in unison. Then slowly, simultaneously, they all turned to stare at Freeburg. Okay, this was getting a bit much. Why were they all staring at him? What do you want? Asked Freeburg. The dark ward was suddenly alive with the echoing sibilance of whispering. Voices, lots of voices, all hissing in the darkness. Yet Freeburg was somehow able to hear what they were saying. He could distinguish words from the morass of insistent, comatose demands. I don't know where the hypnosil is, he said. Again, the coma victims responded with one mind. Simultaneously, they turned and pointed to the same spot on the far wall. The patient closest to Freeburg whispered in the stoner's ear. Even as far gone as he was, Freeburg couldn't help but notice that the patches over this guy's eyes were bloody, and his lips were blue. Dead people talking, not good at all. But you know what? What would it hurt to do these guys just one little favor? They all seemed to know where the hypnosil was. The stiff who just whispered in his ear said the drugs were in a box hidden under the lab sink. What sink? Freeburg looked around. All his new buddies still had their arms raised. They were still pointing over to the far wall, to a, oh right, the sink, cool. What the fuck were drugs doing in a sink? Freeburg walked over to the metallic basin. Not there. Oh yeah, cupboards beneath. Open the door, look inside. Result! A plain cardboard box. Freeburg pulled the box out of its hiding place and opened the unsealed flaps. The box was filled with small bottles of pills, dozens of them. Freeburg took out one of the bottles and stared intently at the label. Come on, eyes, do your thing. Focus for the man. The label read Hypnosil. Hypnosil. Something about Hypnosil? No, don't tell me I know this one. He remembered. Freeburg turned around and shook the bottle at the rows of sitting comatose bodies. Though they all wore bloodied patches over their eyes, Freeburg knew these dead dudes could see him just fine. I can't pour these down the drain, Freeburg protested. We need this stuff, man. Finally, the nickel dropped. Freeburg remembered why they'd come to this crazy nightmare place. They'd come here for this Hypnosil shit. But even if they hadn't, it was totally against Freeburg's nature to waste good drugs. For all he knew, Hypnosil could rock. If it could stop dreams, who knows what else it could do? LSD had been experimental once, ecstasy too. And even if vanilla Hypnosil was a drag, it might well kick ass in the right cocktail. Oh man, he knew these dead dudes all wanted the pills gone, but he just couldn't do it. He had a whole box in his hand, all fresh goods. Worst case scenario, they had to be worth a few bucks on the open market. Will and Lori had been right about this nightmare shit. Freeburg was having a total mare. No amount of resin was going to help him solve this dilemma. Drip, drip. What the fuck? 2 drops of clear viscous fluid had landed on Freeburg's forehead. Where? He looked up, his mouth hanging wide open, his eyes almost totally glassy, with heavy, kick-ass substance abuse. It was the caterpillar. It had been in the room all the time, and somehow it had crawled up onto the ceiling of the patient room, from where it had stalked the stoner with pinpoint accuracy. As for the dripping fluid, it was insect drool, a disgusting trail of saliva, hanging from the caterpillar's grimacing mouth. Oh, that's so gross. It was all fucking gross. The dead bodies, the whispering, the saliva, everything. Way too fucking... The caterpillar dropped and landed on Freeburg's face. Freeburg cried out in surprise and let the pills fall to the floor. Then quickly he seized the fat, warm, squirming, leathery body of the Freddy pillar in both hands and tried to pull it away. The nightmare creature had other ideas. Freeburg could feel the oversized maggot's spastic pulse on his lips as it slowly forced its way into his mouth and began to slither down into his throat. He couldn't breathe. The caterpillar burrowed deeper. He couldn't fucking breathe. He tried to pull it out, but the creature was far too deep inside of him. Freeburg convulsed, fell to the ground, howled in pain. The thing, the caterpillar, was inside his stomach, inside his fucking soul. Over the years, Freeburg had sniffed, swallowed, or injected practically every substance known to man. But in all that time, he'd never felt his mind slip away quite as it did now. The caterpillar was releasing something inside him, some narcotic, some psychedelic, some... Freeburg was growing faint. His thoughts became light. The pain and revulsion were history. He was flying away. Suddenly the coughing and heaving stopped and Freeburg grew quiet. Then slowly he stood up. But there was something different about him. He didn't sway and drift along as normal. When he moved now, he bent forward and splayed his limbs like a rag doll. The body was Freeburg's, but the will was Freddy Krueger's. Freddy commanded Freeburg to lurch forward and awkwardly pick up the spilled bottles of Hypnosil. What remained of Freeburg cried out in protest, but the cries came from deep inside Freeburg's body and were muffled and faint. Freeburg's mouth was under Freddy's control. "Relax, kid," rasped Freeburg's lips. "Freddy's driving now." And Freddy wasted no time in picking up the Hypnosil, opening the bottles, and tipping all of the vital pills down the sink. "Hey!" From inside the adjacent monitoring room, Deputy Stubbs could see Freeburg through the large observation window. Freeburg was pouring the pills down the drain. Linderman stood right behind the police officer, but he couldn't take his eyes off all the bodies in the patient room, just lying there on slabs like corpses. Both of them were looking straight through the window into the patient room. None of them paid any attention to the reflection in the observation window. The reflection of Stubbs, Linderman, and someone who had just quietly entered the monitoring room behind them. "What the hell is he?" Stubbs had to go in there and stop the stupid kid. He stepped back and knocked into Linderman, who was standing too close. Linderman moved to get out of the deputy's way. He turned and saw the huge machete swinging down hard toward his face. It was Jason Voorhees. Linderman gasped, unable to move, but was saved at the last instant by Stubbs, who with lightning reactions pulled the boy out of the way of the killer edge. Sparks flew as Jason's deadly weapon slammed into a fully operational monitoring console, the electricity flooding through the metal blade and coursing through Jason's quivering, electrocuted body. Linderman almost shat his pants. It was Voorhees again. On both of the last 2 days of Linderman's young life, he had seen Jason's machete cutting down through the air towards his face. On both occasions, Linderman had survived without even a scratch. Stubbs pushed the bewildered kid towards the door, then took out his revolver. "Get out of here!" he barked. "Go!" Jason was twitching, but it looked as if he was going to pull his machete free and break that connection. Stubbs fired at him once, twice, at point-blank range. This copycat bastard would... Jason lashed out with his hand and grabbed Stubbs by the neck. The killer voltage traveled up from the console, through the machete blade into Jason Voorhees, then through Jason's hand into Deputy Stubbs. Stubbs' muscles seized up immediately, and both officer and maniac shook with the power of the electricity, both men frying inside a shower of sparks. The deputy dropped his gun, though his grip had tightened. The spastic jerking of his limbs shook the revolver free, letting it fall to the ground. Laurie, Kia, and Will had found yet another staircase. Will was sure he knew where the stairs led to. The trio were in the process of discussing this when Laurie raised a hand for silence, a troubled look on her face. "Wait up," she said, voice trembling. "Do you hear that?" Kia and Will did what she asked. They listened. It was distant, it was echoing, but it was clear. They could hear the sound of screaming. Linderman was wild with terror. He stood transfixed in the open doorway, screaming and screaming. Stubbs had told him to run away, but he couldn't. He had to watch. He wanted to see the deputy blow Jason away, and he had, only it hadn't worked. Electricity, gunshots, Voorhees just took it all, and he was still standing. It was Stubbs who was turning all black and charred, Stubbs whose hair had blackened, and whose eyes and mouth had dried up and shriveled. Jason just stood there, conducting the electricity, killing the deputy. Almighty, all-powerful, invulnerable Jason. Boom! The monitoring console overloaded with one final explosion of sparks, the air now thick with the smell of charred flesh and electrical burning. Almost immediately, what few lights were on in the clinic now cut off. The destruction of the control panel had tripped most of the main fuses in the building, causing a few scant red emergency backup lights to activate. Every corridor and every room in Weston Hills Psychiatric Institution was now the color of blood. Stubbs hit the ground, his skin completely char-grilled. Jason's machete, too, was red-hot. It glowed in the dim light of the cramped room, but Jason didn't seem to notice the heat as he withdrew the weapon from the console. Nor did he seem in any way affected by the electricity or the gunshot wounds. Stubbs was a blackened slab of meat, while Jason merely displayed some minor singeing at the edges of his already torn and ragged clothing. Now Jason turned his attention towards the terrified Linderman. The terrified young man scooped up Stubbs's gun and ran, screaming for his life. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been chapters 12 and 13 of Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization by Stephan Hand. I gotta say, what I'm really enjoying about this book, there's not a whole lot of extra things, but there's expanded things. We got more of the insight into why Detective Stubbs thought, or Officer Stubbs thought, that it was the copycat killer of Jason Voorhees. We got to find out that he knew about the events of Jason Goes to Hell, that the cops had assumed that the killings that happened after Jason was blown up was a copycat killer. So that was pretty neat. And the book even mentioned Roy Burns. Big points for that. Really enjoyed that whole thing there with getting into the mind of Stubbs. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed the extended version of the Freeburg getting high with the caterpillar scene. You know, the thoughts, what's going through Freeburg's stoned mind as this caterpillar comes out and pulls out this big old hookah and, you know, blows the smoke in his face and everything. And it made the scene even creepier with the people coming, you know, setting up on the beds and pointing at him and whispering. And the whisper sound effect I picked for that creeps me out so bad. Like, I just did one run through with it and didn't re-listen to that part for editing. It was pretty creepy. You just got like a little taste of it, but like the file's about 4 minutes long of that, and oh, it's wicked. But I thought that was pretty neat. The whole scene with Stubbs, I still hate that scene because I just wish Stubbs had lived longer in this story. I feel like he could have. I just feel like he should have went down fighting more than just getting grabbed and electrocuted by Jason. It's kind of like how I'm disappointed about Freddy only getting the one kill in the movie. It just seemed, this electrocution kill was just kind of you know. I would have rather seen Stubbs like sacrifice himself, you know, trying to go toe to toe with Jason. And yeah, he gets struck down and killed, but at least it would have been a little better than getting electrocuted like that. Linderman screaming, that was me doing that the best I could. I could not find a believable male scream sound effect. They all sounded really bad. So I had to make that one myself. Turn the volume down on that as much as I could, since it was supposed to be distant and echoey. But I really enjoyed these two chapters, you know. I've always enjoyed the dream that Laurie has, where everybody's like, maybe we should do a sacrifice. Tie the bitch up, you know. I love that. It's just Freddy's twisted, you know. He preys on people's insecurities and shit. And he really pulled that with Laurie. Although it does suck, the book did include the whole Jason died in water and Freddy died in fire. What can we do with that line? So apparently the book's sticking to the whole Jason is scared of water thing. Maybe if I look at it the way one of you subscribers, I can't remember who said it in the comments, but maybe it's not that Jason's afraid of water per se, because we've seen him, you know, hell, he walked underwater pretty much all the way to New York City after the yacht, you know, burned up in Part 8. So maybe it's just Freddy getting into his head and twisting Jason's perceptions and twisting Jason's memories and fears. Maybe that's what fucks with him about the water, and not so much just being afraid of it because he drowned. At least that's the way I need to look at it. Otherwise, I'm like, It's just like I told somebody in the comment section on one of the other chapters when they mentioned it. I said, what it sounds like to me is some producer who doesn't really know what they're talking about is like in a meeting one day with like the script writers doing some changes, and he's like, hey, what about how like Freddy got burned up and Jason drowned? Like, he died in water, he died in fire. Maybe y'all could do something with that. Just put it in the script. Put it in the script. And the writer just rolled his eyes like, okay. And then he just wrote it just like the producer said, as kind of like an in-joke. Maybe. It's kind of like the producer that was on the Superman Lives movie that was supposed to get made with Nicolas Cage. He wanted a giant mechanical spider. Didn't care how they put it in there, but he's like, you're going to do it. And since that movie didn't get made, he threw it into the Wild Wild West movie that got made in the early 2000s with Will Smith. He got his giant spider in there. So producers can be like that, so it's actually believable. But alright guys, this was chapters 12 and 13. Some pretty infamous scenes from the movie played out in tonight's narration, and I think the novelization form of these scenes is even better than the movie because you get a lot more detail, a lot more insight into what the characters are thinking while this is going on, what they're feeling, like when Laurie finds out her dad is the one that gave the Hypnosil out. So, I really enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys thought of tonight's chapters, and I'll be back very soon with more of Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization by Stephan Hant. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening. And pleasant dreams!
Hi, this is Jeffrey Reddick, creator of Final Destination. Greetings, slashaholics. This is David Bergantino, author of the Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror books, the Bard's Blood horror Shakespeare books.
Hey guys, this is Jason Brooks, Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th Vengeance.
Hey, this is Slasher Pepper.
Hey everybody, it's CJ Graham, Jason, Friday the 13th Part 6.
This is William Patterson, known to Friday the 13th fans as Eric Morris.
Hi, this is Deborah Voorhees from Friday the 13th Part 5.
Hey folks, this is Adam Marcus, director of Jason Goes to Hell and Secret Santa.
Hello, kiddies. This is John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper.
Hi, this is Kane Hodder, better known as Jason from Friday the 13th, Victor Crowley from Hatchet.
And you are listening.
You're listening.
And you're listening.
And you're listening.
Just want to make sure you guys know you're listening.
You are listening.
And you are listening.
And you are lucky enough to be listening.
Okay, boils and ghouls, you are listening.
You are listening
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
The 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
to the 80s Slasher Librarian. Keep listening, or I'll kill you.